Hello and welcome to another episode of A Brief History. Today's episode, Phineas and Ferb. Ready, set, go! Los Angeles, California, the early 1990s. At a time when cartoons were mainly viewed as kid stuff that only existed to sell toys, the world of televised animation was in the process of being completely revolutionized by Matt Groening's adult animated sitcom, The Simpsons. But all of that is a story for another time. Our story actually begins in the character layout department of The Simpsons production team, where a certain pair of animators by the name of Dan Povenmire and Jeff Swampy Marsh were starting to become good friends. Maybe even more than friends.
Best friends.
But while working on a revolutionary cartoon with your new best friend is a pretty dope setup, it wasn't exactly that easy. You see, The Simpsons production schedule was a little bit wonky, with artists being laid off and rehired every few months. Meaning that at the end of a production cycle, Povenmire and Marsh would have to find other jobs to keep the lights on during the downtime. And so, the two applied for jobs at Nickelodeon and were accepted to work on one of the network's earliest original cartoons, Rocko's Modern Life.
Hey, wait a minute. Aren't you kind of oversimplifying things?
Yes. Yes, I am.
Alright, carry on.
While at Nickelodeon, Povenmire and Marsh were able to work more closely with each other as a writing team. The two began to form their own signature style and expand their creativity. So much so that they even began to develop their own concept for an original cartoon around 1993 based on their childhood summer vacations. But the idea didn't really start to come together until one day when Povenmire was doodling while out for dinner. He sketched a kid character with a big Dorito-shaped head, and that instantly sparked his imagination. He brought this character concept to Marsh, and from there, ideas for their new show began to flourish. Suddenly, a general idea about making the most of summer vacation was now far more fleshed out, focusing on two stepbrothers, Phineas and Ferb, who spend each day of their summer vacation doing impossible things like building massive citywide roller coasters. Plus, there were now secret agents, evil scientists, A-plots, B-plots, intersecting plots, and yeah, these guys had a lot of ideas for their show. So, with the concept and characters on lock, Povenmire and Marsh were ready to start pitching Phineas and Ferb. But unfortunately, while various networks did take to the idea, they would ultimately reject the pitch, citing the show as being too complicated. But Povenmire and Marsh still had a ton of faith in their show. They weren't just gonna toss out their concept after a couple of rejections, but they did still need to make a living, so with Phineas and Ferb struggling to get off the ground, Povenmire and Marsh continued working on Rocko's Modern Life until the series ended in 1996. And after that, the two kinda went their separate ways for a while. Marsh moved to London, where he helped produce movies, as well as cartoons like Postman Pat and Bounty Hamster. Meanwhile, Povenmire stayed in the US, working on the likes of Hey Arnold, Cat Dog, SpongeBob, and even Family Guy. But even with Marsh off working in a completely different country, Povenmire continued pushing for their passion project, with Phineas and Ferb still being his go-to idea when he had the opportunity to pitch a series. He pitched the show to all sorts of networks for more than a decade, and it always came out the same. The executives loved the idea, but it's just too complicated to greenlight. That is, until Povenmire was able to pitch the show to Disney Channel, and okay, yeah, they turned it down too. But then they were like, psych! And around 2005, they reached out to Povenmire saying that they actually were interested in Phineas and Ferb and wanted him to put together a pilot. Freaking finally! Only took like 12 years. But of course, Povenmire was not gonna do this alone. So he called up Jeff Swampy Marsh all the way in England and asked if he wanted to help produce Phineas and Ferb's pilot. He said yes, and thus, early production on Phineas and Ferb finally began. But rather than sending in a normal pitch script or making a fully animated pilot, Povenmire and Marsh chose, instead, to put together an animatic using their storyboards and Povenmire's expert voice acting.
Phineas, Ferb, I'm gonna go pick up a few things. You boys stay out of trouble, okay?
And sent this in as their pitch. This animatic followed Phineas and Ferb as they attempted to build a roller coaster in their backyard while their sister Candace tries to bust her brother. brothers. All the while, the family pet platypus Perry sneaks off to fight an evil scientist named Dr. Heinz Schmirtz in the episode's B-plot. Somewhere in the chaos, the Perry and Phineas and Ferb plots intersect, and all traces of Phineas and Ferb's roller coaster are erased just before Candace gets home with their mom. And yes, I said Schmirtz, that's actually what he's called in the pilot. So yeah, that was Povenmire and Marsh's Phineas and Ferb pilot, and it worked. Their pitch showed enough promise that Disney Channel greenlit Phineas and Ferb for a full 26-episode season. Fast forward to August 17th, 2007, and 14 years since the show's conception, a fully produced version of Povenmire and Marsh's pilot was officially premiered on Disney Channel. This was the first time Phineas and Ferb was ever aired on TV, acting as a preview for the full season, which would premiere later. And wow, did this preview go over well, gaining more than 10 million views in ratings. And needless to say, hype for the season premiere must have been through the roof, for when the season finally launched on February 1st, 2008, it was basically an instant hit. Pretty much every episode of Phineas and Ferb followed the exact same format that I described earlier. Phineas and Ferb start on a big project, Candace tries to bust them, Perry fights Schmirtz, now renamed Doofenshmirtz.
Oh, there you are, Perry.
Team Rocket blasts off again, roll credits, bop! Phineas and Ferb stuck to a very strict formula with each episode, and yet still managed to find ways to play with its formula and keep things fresh. One of the show's more notable aspects was its music. During production of Season 1, Povenmire and Marsh had written a couple of songs for various episodes. And the higher-ups at Disney loved these songs so much that they requested every episode of the show from that point on have a song in it. Which is a pretty tall order, but Povenmire and Marsh had quite a bit of experience with writing music for cartoons under their belt, having coined the musical episode of Rocko's Modern Life Zanzibar, and heck, Dan Povenmire wrote the freaking Campfire song from SpongeBob. So when it came to music, Phineas and Ferb were in good hands. And not only were they able to manage a song per episode, but the songs were so good that they actually became one of the show's biggest selling points. So like I said, the first season of Phineas and Ferb went over incredibly well, with Disney renewing the show for a second season only a few months after the show premiered. And for the second season, Disney brought Phineas and Ferb over to their new network, Disney XD, in addition to continuing to run it on the main Disney Channel. In fact, Phineas and Ferb was the first show to ever be broadcast on Disney XD back in 2009. And all of this was just the beginning. Between its unique, fast-paced style, charming characters, great music, and humor enjoyable for any age, Phineas and Ferb easily became the newest Disney Channel phenomenon. Being renewed for third and fourth seasons, seeing a TV movie in 2011, plus video games, books, weird talk show spin-offs, and a live show tour that just... oh no. But of course, all good things must come to an end. And come May of 2015, Disney announced that after a 7-year-long run, Phineas and Ferb would be coming to an end later that year. But Disney was not gonna let their longest-running TV series go out without a bang, leading up to the series finale with a freaking 73-hour marathon on Disney XD. All of which culminated with an hour-long finale simulcast on both Disney Channel and Disney XD on June 12th, 2015. And just like that, Phineas and Ferb was over. Except for another hour-long special that aired that November, but aside from that, Phineas and Ferb was over. But just because Phineas and Ferb's unusually long summer had come to an end doesn't mean that Dan Povenmire and Jeff Swampy Marsh were packing things in too. On the contrary, they hit the ground running once again with their new Disney XD series Milo Murphy's Law, which premiered in October of 2016 and has already been renewed for a second season in 2018. So these guys clearly aren't going away anytime soon. Plus there's apparently gonna be a Milo and Phineas and Ferb crossover at some point, so that's pretty cool. Phineas and Ferb was such an outlier and really kind of a risk for Disney Channel back in the day. Like, the show was legitimately pretty ambitious and came around during a time when Disney really wasn't prioritizing animated shows. But the series prospered entirely thanks to the creators' sheer passion and perseverance. It took Povenmire and Marsh over a decade to even be given the chance to pursue their idea. And now, just over 10 years since the show's premiere, Phineas and Ferb is still going strong with an active fan base, regular reruns, and more. Much like Phineas and Ferb in the show, Dan Povenmire and Jeff Swampy Marsh had a big idea that many thought was too complicated to pull off. And not only did they do it, but they somehow made something even bigger and crazier than anyone expected. And whether you're building a roller coaster in your backyard or bringing your decade-old cartoon idea to life, the story of Phineas and Ferb stands as proof that no project is ever too big. Summer's coming up. We're only a month away from the start of summer, and nothing on earth was more exciting to baby Fofi back in the day. I hated school more than anything, so the start of summer break was always the highlight of my year. Did I go outside to play? No. Did I take fun vacations? No. Did I sit inside all day and watch cartoons? Heck yes, I did. I loved summer vacation so much. It was never long enough. But I've been out of school for, 6 years? So unfortunately, these days, summer just kind of feels the same as any other time of year, just hotter. So the magic of summer has been kinda lost as I become a decrepit old man. But if there's one thing that still manages to drum up that childlike excitement for the summer, it's a little show called Phineas and Ferb. There's 104 days of summer vacation and school comes along just to end it, so I have no idea where these guys went to school because that is way more summer than I ever got. But yes, today we're talking about Phineas and Ferb, the Disney Channel classic from 2007 that seems to be having a bit of a nostalgic resurgence these days. And it makes sense. I mean, the show is nearly 13 years old now, and it's been over for like 5 years. But honestly, when I first found out people were going crazy for Phineas and Ferb again, I was like, really? Why? Let me explain. First, if you don't know, Phineas and Ferb is a cartoon about two brothers who spend each day of their summer break doing crazy things like building roller coasters, turning their backyard into a beach, becoming one-hit wonders, and tons of other insane stuff. But their older sister Candace always tries to get them in trouble by telling on them to their mom, which I don't always get. Like roller coasters, race cars, time machines, that junk's dangerous. You could put an eye out. But sometimes she tries to get the boys in trouble for legit just having fun. But it doesn't really matter anyway, because everything Phineas and Ferb do always manages to conveniently disappear right before their mom ever even shows up. Oh, they also have a pet platypus, which, let's be honest, is probably breaking some sort of law. And that platypus, named Perry, is also a secret agent who fights the evil scientist Dr. Doofenshmirtz, who is the best character in the show. And that's pretty much it. That's the whole thing. Nearly every episode follows that exact same structure. Now, I want to take things back to around 2007, back when I was a preteen on the cusp of teenhood with the mind of an 8-year-old. You guys know baby Fofi was obsessed with cartoons. But by middle school, I was kinda moving away from that a little. I still watched plenty of cartoons, but it was becoming more of a passive thing as I started getting more into music and guitar, and that took up most of my free time. And I remember one summer where I spent every single day just sitting on the floor playing guitar with the TV on just for background noise. And when it came to baby Fofi's channels my parents allowed me to watch tier list, Disney Channel was kinda C tier. I mean, the Disney Channel of my childhood was Hannah Montana, Wizards of Waverly Place, The Buzz on Maggie, Brandy and Mr. Whiskers, just a bunch of stuff I was kinda meh on. So I usually only put the TV on Disney Channel when absolutely nothing else was on. And most of the time, that summer, the main thing playing when I'd flip to Disney was a relatively new cartoon called Phineas and Ferb. So my first ever experience of watching this show was just it happening to be on during the day when I wasn't even paying attention. I was never actively watching Phineas and Ferb, and yet I still feel like I ended up seeing every episode at the time. I know because even though I never paid attention to it, I still knew the show's format and catchphrases by heart.
Gee, Ferb, what do you want to do today? Ferb, I know what we're gonna do today. Hey, where's Perry?
What you doing? Doofenshmirtz Evil Incorporated!
A platypus? Patty the platypus?
You guys are so busted, Mom!
Curse you, Patty the platypus!
Oh, there you are, Perry. Boom! There you go. That's every episode of this dang show. I remember thinking it was so weird that Phineas and Ferb had the exact same structure for every episode, because I was used to shows like Billy and Mandy, Invader Zim, and Chowder, where you had literally no clue what each episode was gonna be. And one of the most unique things about that format was how every single episode had at least one original song. Now, these days, I look at that and think, how the heck did they do that? There's over 200 episodes of this show, by the way, and some episodes have multiple songs. That's stupid. Big stupid! It's impressive, don't get me wrong, but if someone came up to you and said, hey, I want you to make an original cartoon with the exact same format for 222 episodes, and you need to have an original musical number in every single one, you would look that person dead in the face and say, you are stupid, that's stupid! And the songs were great. I mean, take another show that had musical numbers in nearly every episode. Class of 3000. Love Andre 3000, love Outkast, loved this show, but it got a little lazy with the songs quite a few times. Meanwhile, Phineas and Ferb was putting out absolute bangers every single time. But back then, Baby Fofi saw this amazing feat of creativity and was just like, huh, that's weird. Anyway, yeah, for some reason back then I wasn't really impressed. I just thought it was weird. Turns out I was the one who was big stupid. Needless to say, Phineas and Ferb just wasn't gelling with Baby Fofi. But fast forward to 2018, and adult Fofi is watching Phineas and Ferb almost every day, doing a ton of research on it for a video, and for some reason getting choked up listening to Summer Belongs to You because it's just the happiest song ever, and for some reason that kind of stuff makes me cry. What changed here? Well, for me, the moment where everything Phineas and Ferb clicked was the episode Dude, We're Getting the Band Back Together. This episode is all about the boys getting their parents' favorite 80s hair metal band Love Handle back together for their anniversary. Now that already made me turn my head a little back in the day as a kid who was learning guitar and getting obsessed with music. But then the first song came up. Phineas and Ferb walk into a guitar shop. Alright, cool, you have my attention. And the lead singer of Love Handle sings a song about how most popular music genres can be traced right back to blues music. And at that time, the only thing I loved more than 80s metal was blues music. So a cartoon talking about both really made me stand up and go, excuse me? It really impressed me. This was the first time I'd ever seen a cartoon appeal to the guitar and music nerd side of me in such a real way. And this was the episode that made me start taking Phineas and Ferb seriously back in the day. Or well, as seriously as you can take a show about aquatic mammal secret agents and kids who sing gibberish songs. But even then, I didn't suddenly become a die-hard Phineas and Ferb fan. Or, as I call it, Nah, I kind of formed a sense of respect for the show. I still didn't seek it out, but anytime it was on, instead of thinking, alright, I was more like, oh, cool. And that was the extent of my experience with Phineas and Ferb for like the next decade or so. And a lot of things changed during that time. Watching cartoons went from all I cared about to kind of a passive activity to something I rarely did at all once I got into YouTube. But then, sometime between 2017 and 2018, I started getting back into cartoons thanks to shows like Steven Universe and Gravity Falls. And it was like an immediate 180, man. I went from never watching cartoons to suddenly going right back into Baby Fofi mode, wanting to watch as many cartoons as I possibly could all day long. And the best part was now I could, because it was my job. So I was binge watching all sorts of new shows. Star vs. the Forces of Evil, Gumball, DuckTales, all that. But I'm a sucker for some nostalgia, so I also decided to go back and revisit a few shows from my childhood. There were a few obvious choices like SpongeBob and Teen Titans, and a few less obvious choices like 16 and Total Drama. But then I started thinking about that one Disney Channel show from back in middle school. That Phineas and Ferb thing I never really cared about, but for whatever reason just stuck in my head for years. I'd seen a few people talking about the show on YouTube and Twitter kinda out of nowhere, and it took me by surprise a little. See, like, I knew this was a show people remembered, I knew it was decently popular, and like I said, I enjoyed it well enough as a kid and had some level of respect for it, but it was never something I was super into. I wouldn't have called myself a fan of Phineas and Ferb back then, and to put it bluntly, I didn't remember it being anything that special overall. But as more people started reminiscing about it online, I got more and more curious. Figured I must have missed something, so I took the plunge, started rewatching Phineas and Ferb, and my God, this show is freaking incredible, man! Like, yeah, I thought it was fine back in the day, but as an adult, Phineas and Ferb is a near perfect cartoon, and I can't believe I didn't see that before. The characters are likable and fun, the scenarios are ridiculous, the songs are painfully catchy, the format never gets old, and they really play around with it at times, and the whole show has this nostalgic vibe that just reminds me of being a kid excited for summer. And like I said, I'm a big sucker for nostalgia. Suddenly, I was waking up every morning and turning on Disney XD to catch Phineas and Ferb reruns during breakfast. And whenever I get really into something like that, I immediately want to start working on a video about it. So I fell down the rabbit hole, learning every little thing I could about the history of Phineas and Ferb, who made the show, how it came to be, everything, and I made my Phineas and Ferb brief history. And it was only then, more than a decade after the show premiered and after I put 2 weeks worth of work into a video retrospective, gaining an entirely new perspective and appreciation for the show and its legacy, that I realized, I think I actually like this show a little bit. Okay, jokes aside, Phineas and Ferb is, without a doubt, one of the best things Disney Channel ever produced. The creators of the show clearly captured lightning in a bottle that has stuck with people for over a decade, as evidenced by all the videos about the show still being made on YouTube, the memes being used to confuse PewDiePie, and all the TikToks I've seen referencing the show and even ranking the songs. Which, on that note, I'ma just say it. Busted's overrated. It's fun, it's catchy, but Ain't Got Rhythm is clearly better. And hey, the show's actually getting a comeback pretty soon with a Disney Plus original movie, which I suggest we call D-Poms from now on. So I guess the world's longest summer's just gonna keep on going. People are really gonna hate me for that busted comment, aren't they?
Yes. Yes, we are.
So, this is a tricky one. Today, I'm gonna be talking about Phineas and Ferb, the Disney cartoon about building roller coasters, severe parental neglect, and animal secret agents fighting evil scientists. See, this show is obviously a classic. It's probably Disney Channel's most successful cartoon. It premiered in 2007, it was incredibly popular, and for an entire generation of kids, Phineas and Ferb was just the S-tier show. Like, right up there with early SpongeBob. But unlike SpongeBob, Phineas and Ferb ended back in 2015, 6 whole years ago. And like, am I the only one who's kind of surprised by that? Like, doesn't it kind of feel like Phineas and Ferb never actually left? That can't just be me, right? But yeah, Phineas and Ferb has been over for a long time. And I was planning on doing this video of pretending Phineas and Ferb isn't over a while ago. That is, until... yeah, so Phineas and Ferb isn't quite as over now as it was a few months ago. But one movie in 6 years is not enough to say a show is back. And as far as we know, Candace Against the Universe, that's all we're gonna get. They haven't made any new episodes since 2015, so Phineas and Ferb, technically still over. But I would very much like it not to be. This was one of the biggest cartoons of the late 2000s and the early 2010s. So how are we supposed to fill the void now that one of the defining shows of our generation is over? Well, like I always say, it's time to live in denial. I think you know how we do things by now. Today, I'm gonna take a look at everything Phineas and Ferb related that isn't the actual show, in the hopes of never having to face the harsh bitterness of the reality we currently live in. So first, for anyone who doesn't know, Phineas and Ferb is all about these two guys who do crazy, out-of-this-world things during their summer vacation. They have a sister named Candace who's always trying to get them in trouble for the stuff they get up to. They have a pet platypus named Perry, who's also a secret agent fighting an evil scientist named Dr. Doofenshmirtz, who I think is everyone's favorite character, and the only one I can do an impression of.
Ah, Perry the Platypus.
Every episode follows more or less the same formula, there's a lot of musical numbers, it's a pretty classic setup. And these dudes had the summer break we could only have dreamed of growing up. And if you know anything about me, you know I did not spend my summer vacations building rockets, fighting mummies, or climbing the Eiffel Tower. Nah, Baby Fofi spent his summer breaks inside, watching cartoons and playing video games. Especially the video games. Games I could get sucked into for hours. That's how I went on my adventures, virtually. So lucky for us, Phineas and Ferb was huge, so there's all sorts of stuff we can look at. And just like last time when I was pretending Gravity Falls wasn't over, I want to start by looking at the world of Phineas and Ferb toys. Yeah, that's pretty much what I expected. Just like with Gravity Falls, there are Phineas and Ferb toys, but God, they are just stupidly expensive these days. And unlike the Gravity Falls video, I never bought any of these back in the day. So the best I can do today is to just take a look at what I could have had if I hadn't waited until everything was over $100. This is really what's become my channel, huh? I used to do heavily detailed and researched videos on pop culture history. Now I'm looking at pictures of toys I can't afford. Alright, we have some pretty standard stuff here. Honestly, really cool looking action figures of all the main characters. Got Candace, Doofenshmirtz, Perry the Platypus, Ferb, and... oh my god! So this is Phineas. Alright, how did they get literally every character just right? Except Phineas. He looks cursed. I know I've made jokes about Funko Pops having dead, soulless eyes, but this is next level. I think the underlying trauma of all those life-threatening adventures finally caught up to Phineas. Also, why is he so big? Look at him next to Candace. He's huge. And I'm supposed to pay $100 for this? Yeah, no. I'm gonna need something a little more affordable and less this. So let's go with the old standby. Video games. Again, Phineas and Ferb was super popular for a really long time, so there's a number of games based on the series. About 4, from what I can tell, not counting mobile games and browser games. The first one came out for the Nintendo DS way back in 2009, and it's kinda your standard kids game for the time. Some basic running and jumping, collecting stuff, and playing minigames. If you grew up with it, I could absolutely see you being super nostalgic for it, but for me, it's not really anything special, to be honest. Though I will say the game being full 3D was pretty impressive right out of the gate. And they actually made a 3D Phineas that won't haunt my dreams. But while it looks like Phineas and Ferb, it doesn't really have the Phineas and Ferb energy. I feel like I played a million games just like this growing up. So this doesn't really scream Phineas and Ferb, the game, as much as it screams kids game. Featuring Phineas and Ferb. I mean, the music doesn't even feel like the show. Overall, it's not a bad attempt, but for our purposes today, it's just not quite there. Apparently, this game does have a sequel, but it just looks like more of the same to me. So instead, let's hop over to the home consoles and take a look at Phineas and Ferb Across the Second Dimension for the PlayStation 3. This game was released in 2011 and was based on the first big Phineas and Ferb movie. And you know, it's been a couple years, the show's bigger, we're on the PS3 now, maybe this will really give us the Phineas and Ferb spirit we've been looking for. And it's closer? Honestly, this game's kinda weird. All the setup is shoved into this one montage that lasts like a minute before you're just tossed into the first level, which is right in the middle of the movie's plot. Then the game's just like, alright, go! Suddenly, everything's covered in purple gelatin, we're talking to other dimension versions of characters, Phineas knows who Doofenshmirtz is. This game really expects you to have seen the movie in order to keep up. Which isn't great, since what I'm looking for is something that can deliver the Phineas and Ferb experience without being attached to the show. But it's not that bad, just a little weird. Gameplay-wise, it's one of those Skylanders-style co-op action games, which was pretty much what every kid's game was in the early 2010s. It looks like Phineas and Ferb, it's fully voiced by all the original actors, and it plays pretty well. But then there's that word, co-op. It's a game designed to be played with friends. I don't have those, and I've played enough of these Skylanders-style games to know that if you're playing by yourself, things move pretty slowly. So while yeah, the game's fine, it's not really my style. And being so heavily attached to the Second Dimension movie means it kinda misses the mark for the video too. I wanna feel like I'm playing through an episode of the show. These feel like games based on a show. Yes, there is a difference. And to be fair, that's only scratching the surface of the world of Phineas and Ferb games. Maybe some other time I'll do more of a deep dive on these games and a few of the ones I couldn't look at today. But for now, let's try something else. Maybe super interactive stuff isn't what we need to bring back that Phineas and Ferb spirit. I mean, all our memories of Phineas and Ferb didn't involve effort from us. Nah, man, it was summer. We were lying on the floor with a bag of Chex Mix watching the One Hit Wonder episode for the 20th time that week. Wait, One Hit Wonder. Oh, duh, what about music? Phineas and Ferb is famous for its songs, so maybe there are some soundtrack CDs to check out. Oh my god, okay, yes, there very much are. Apparently, having at least one song in every episode for 8 years straight leads to a lot of soundtracks getting released. And if you know the show at all, you don't need me to tell you that Phineas and Ferb songs are on another freaking level, dude. Back when I made my first Phineas and Ferb video, I had some of these soundtracks on repeat constantly. The main theme, Ain't Got Rhythm, Busted, Everything's Better with Perry, Summer Belongs to You? This song is so happy it should be studied. And there's dozens and dozens more songs across all sorts of albums from the show, TV specials, movies, there's even freaking holiday music. I'm pretty sure there's a Phineas and Ferb song for every occasion. So are these a good way to pretend the show isn't over? Duh, these songs are a good way to pretend my problems don't exist, let alone that a cartoon ended. But you might think, that's too easy. Of course these songs give off the Phineas and Ferb vibes. They were part of the show. And that was the whole problem you had with the Second Dimension game, so it's kinda cheating, isn't it? And yeah, I guess. So how about this? What if I told you there was another show that is absolutely perfect for anyone missing Phineas and Ferb? Yeah, some of you probably saw this coming. We're talking Milo Murphy's Law. This show premiered on Disney back in 2016, and if you've never heard of it, you might notice that it looks a lot like Phineas and Ferb. Well, that's because it's from the creators of Phineas and Ferb, Dan Povenmire and Jeff Swampy Marsh. This was their next project right after Phineas and Ferb, and it's all about Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and how the main character, Milo Murphy, is the living embodiment of that law. It's wacky, it's over the top, Milo is voiced by Weird Al Yankovic, and chances are, if you like Phineas and Ferb, you'll dig this show. It's only got 2 seasons, at least so far, running from 2016 to 2019, but it's on Disney+. Give it a shot. And hey, there's even a Phineas and Ferb crossover episode, which I don't count. It's a different show. Oh, right, I almost forgot to mention, Dan Povenmire also has another new show coming to Disney Channel called Hamster and Gretel. It's all about 2 siblings who were given superpowers by aliens, but hijinks ensue, and the older brother's powers accidentally go into their pet hamster instead. You know, like when that happens. The show's apparently gonna have plenty of music, as you'd expect, and of course, it's still got that classic Phineas and Ferb art style. And since Milo Murphy got a crossover episode, I think it's a pretty safe bet we'll see Phineas and Ferb pop up in this show too. So at this point, we've looked at Phineas and Ferb toys, games, soundtracks, and even other shows from the same creators. That is a lot of different ways to pretend Phineas and Ferb isn't over. I didn't even get to the books. There is so much more I could talk about. But after all this, if it's just not enough and you really need something else to fill that void left behind when Phineas and Ferb ended, just download TikTok, man. For real, I've been on TikTok for like a year and a half now, and it seriously feels like no one ever shuts up about Phineas and Ferb over there. Especially not this guy. Dude talks about it all the time. You'd think he co-created it and voiced a main character or something. But at the end of the day, Phineas and Ferb is, in fact, over. But with Candace Against the Universe coming out so recently and doing really well, plus things the creators have hinted at, and the show just generally skyrocketing in nostalgic popularity, I honestly don't think this is the last we'll see of Phineas and Ferb. Whether it's a new movie or a continuation of the show, it is way more likely that Phineas and Ferb continues than Gravity Falls or Steven Universe. So, yeah, maybe Phineas and Ferb is a show we don't have to pretend is over. Then what the heck did I do all this for? You know what I miss? The days when every cartoon had some crappy tie-in video game. Whatever happened to these, man? Back when I was a kid, I spent so much of my summer vacations playing this junk. If SpongeBob wasn't on TV, I'd just boot up Revenge of the Flying Dutchman and everything was fine. Yeah, I didn't have Battle for Bikini Bottom. But these days, licensed cartoon games are pretty few and far between. Wait a minute. Cartoons? Nostalgic memories of summer vacation? That can only mean one thing! That's right, it's time for Phineas and Ferb, the Disney Channel cartoon about kids violating all sorts of construction laws and aquatic mammals that fight evil. You guys already know this stuff. This cartoon just becomes more and more classic with every passing year, even though it's technically been over since 2015. And last year, I made a video called Pretending Phineas and Ferb Isn't Over, where I took a look at a bunch of random Phineas and Ferb stuff to fill the void. Toys, music, other shows entirely, and most importantly, video games. Yeah, there are Phineas and Ferb video games. Quite a few, actually. And I can't think of a better way to honor a show all about making the most of your summer break and not spending all day playing video games by sitting inside and spending all day playing video games. So today, I'm checking out every Phineas and Ferb video game that I have. Just whatever Phineas and Ferb games I could find sitting around. I think I have them all. We got about 6 games to look at today, and I think the best place to start with Phineas and Ferb games is, well, Phineas and Ferb, the video game. This little Nintendo DS game came out way back in 2009 and is, as far as I can tell, the first proper Phineas and Ferb video game. And it is not good. It's not good. Phineas and Ferb is what I can only really call a DS game? I mean, yeah, duh, hear me out. The game starts, as you'd expect, with Phineas and Ferb under that same old tree thinking about what they want to do that day. Shocker, they do the roller coaster thing again. So we control Phineas and Ferb as they run around and collect junk to build their coaster. Sounds simple enough, but God, almost every single thing you do requires some kind of gimmicky touchscreen. Gimmick. Maybe I should rewrite that. Draw a circle to dig through the trash. Swipe up to reach a ladder. Tap the buttons to climb the ladder. Draw, swipe, tap, draw, swipe, tap. It's the majority of the game. But at the same time, the basics of just like running and jumping, you still use the regular buttons. So you're constantly swapping between the buttons and the stylus, and even as someone who grew up on the DS, this kind of control scheme is really annoying. It's games like these that led to so many DS styluses getting lost back in the day. But in terms of recreating the Phineas and Ferb vibe, it's mostly there. It's jaggedy and weird, but it does look the part. The setup is exactly what you'd expect, and the characters are all playing their parts. Candace shows up every now and then, and the game turns into bad Pac-Man. You play as Perry the Platypus sometime near the end. All the side characters show up, so yeah, everything's kinda here and accounted for. There's no voice acting, which, okay, fair, it's an old DS game. But the biggest failure here is the music. It's pretty bad. Straight up, it sounds like bad Super Nintendo music from the 90s. If you have nostalgia for this game, I can understand that. I just don't think it's for me. It's pretty repetitive, just running around, doing random touchscreen minigames, and building more and more elaborate stuff. Oh, actually, I forgot. You can actually ride the roller coasters you build. Heck, if you get enough speed, you can even go into space. You know, like the show! And, that actually sounds really fun. Let's give that a shot. I'm gonna play a different game now. And funnily enough, next up is another DS game, Phineas and Ferb Ride Again. It is a sequel to the first game, released only a year later. So, I don't know, maybe it'll be better. Well, first impressions are this is the exact same game. I mean, everything looks and sounds identical, which, makes sense. The team probably only had a few months to put it all together. But there are some improvements here. There's more chances to play as other characters. The music at least tries to feel more like Phineas and Ferb. But most importantly, the controls. Pretty much all the touchscreen junk has been restricted to just the building minigames, which makes the platforming flow a lot better. Nerd talk, nerd talk, nerd talk. Basically, the game's more focused, less annoying to play, and I like it more. Plus, Candace dies? So, the Phineas and Ferb DS series. Honestly, I don't love them. They're okay, I guess. But I don't feel like I've had a real Phineas and Ferb experience after playing them. Like I said, the music's off, there's no voice acting, the gameplay, at its best, is still not great. I'm looking for a game that feels built from the ground up to recreate the Phineas and Ferb vibe. These feel like generic kids games wearing a Phineas and Ferb skin. Though, to be fair, at the time of writing this, I haven't quite finished them. I really tried to beat all the games in this video, but I was running low on time. So maybe I'll beat the games while I'm editing this video and tell you if my opinions changed right now. No. Great, moving on. So our first game was from 2009, the second from 2010, and believe it or not, we got another Phineas and Ferb game just a year later in 2011. Technically two. This was the year of Phineas and Ferb's big Disney Channel original movie, Across the Second Dimension. So naturally, we got some tie-in games of the same name. Phineas and Ferb Across the Second Dimension for PlayStation 3 and Wii, and handheld versions for the PSP and DS. For the console game, I've got the Wii version. They're the same thing. But hey, I actually managed to get a sealed copy of this one. The Wii is basically a retro game console at this point, so having a brand new sealed Wii game is really cool no matter what. So this game's weird. Usually these kind of movie tie-in games follow the plot of the movie basically beat for beat, but this game doesn't do that. You boot the game up, press start, and the first thing you get is a music video in crisp DVD quality set to a song that literally explains the plot of the entire movie, which is all about Phineas and Ferb getting trapped in another dimension where Dr. Doofenshmirtz rules the entire tri-state area, and of course they gotta save the day and get back home. And the game is technically about the same thing, but it doesn't follow any of the movie's actual events. See, about 2/3 of the way through the movie, there's this montage of the gang hopping from dimension to dimension. It's mainly just there for some fun after some of the more intense scenes in the movie, but no joke, the entire game takes place inside that montage, just following Phineas and Ferb through a bunch of different dimensions that never show up in the movie. There's a dimension where everything's covered in gelatin, there's a balloon dimension, there's a dimension based on old black and white cartoons, Gnome World. The game really expects you to have seen the movie in order to follow what's going on. Which is just kind of weird. I mean, it's not like it's saving you spoilers or anything. They spoil everything in the first cutscene. But yeah, Across the Second Dimension starts about 55 minutes into the movie and follows Phineas and Ferb through a bunch of different dimensions as they try to stop Doofenshmirtz, build crazy inventions, and fight an army of robots. Yeah, You heard me. We got combat this time. Phineas and Ferb can and will kill. The main gameplay of this one is running around, shooting robots, and platforming. And it's not that bad. It controls well, it's nice and colorful, and there's even some flying levels for a bit of variety. I'm kinda digging this one so far. And that shouldn't surprise me, because this was made by High Impact Games. Before Phineas and Ferb, these guys mainly worked on the PSP Ratchet & Clank games. If you don't know, Ratchet & Clank is like my favorite game series of all time. I love these games. And the PSP game, Size Matters, is one of my favorite handheld games ever. A full-fledged console-quality Ratchet & Clank game on the go, I love it. And you can see a lot of that Ratchet & Clank influence in Across the Second Dimension. I mean, platforming through different worlds, shooting robots with wacky guns, collecting tiny metal scraps. This is a Ratchet & Clank game. But despite that, I still can't say this game is anything more than decent. See, kids games in the early 2010s had a little something I call Skylanders disease? I'm sure you know, but Skylanders was a kids game built for co-op multiplayer that focused on cartoon characters slowly traveling through really long stages, fighting wave after wave of enemies, all from this kind of bird's eye view perspective. That game made all the money in the world, so pretty much every kids game that decade became a Skylanders. Heck, even Ratchet & Clank got in on the action, with probably the worst game in the series. It's a gameplay formula that I can smell a mile away, and it's just not my thing. It can be done well, but in my experience, it just takes a fun idea and makes it slow and boring real quick. And this Phineas and Ferb take on the formula, while better than some of the other games I've played today, was overall just okay as a game. Yeah, if you're looking for the most engaging and well-designed game in the world, yeah, this isn't it. But if you're not looking for a super great game and just want something with that Phineas and Ferb energy, Across the Second Dimension is actually really good. The game's got new cutscenes fully voiced by the original cast, there's unlockable characters, and like I said, the whole game is basically a cut side plot from the movie. That's really cool. Heck, that music video montage at the start of the game, that song's not in the movie. I think they made it exclusively for this game, and it's just as good, if not better, than most of the songs that are in the actual movie. You can really tell that there was serious effort put into making this the Phineas and Ferb game, and it shows. And even if it's not my genre, even if it didn't blow me away, I really respect that. This game's alright. The DS version's completely different. So yeah, every version of Across the Second Dimension is the exact same game, except the DS one. One of the most innovative, cutting-edge consoles of its time. Can't handle Gnome World. So the DS version was made by much different people for a much different system, leading to a much different game. Does the word much sound weird to you now? And honestly, I like it. It's basically the same setup as the console version, hopping from dimension to dimension, shooting robots and jumping on stuff, but it streamlines everything down to a more focused single-player experience. The console version just kind of stares at me wondering why I'm not playing with a friend.
I don't have those!
But yeah, Second Dimension on DS surprised me. The levels all have completely different themes, plus they're shorter, broken up into more bite-sized pieces on a world map that definitely wasn't completely and utterly ripped off from New Super Mario Bros. You can swap between playing as Phineas, Ferb, and Perry at any time. You can ride that giant robot dog. This game ditches the Skylanders approach and is just a regular 3D platformer now. And I dig it. Like, if Phineas and Ferb had existed in the 90s, this is the game they would have had on PlayStation. And I mean that in the best way. Of course, it's not perfect. We still got those touchscreen minigames to deal with, and overall the game isn't amazing. But compared to the other games we've looked at, I probably had the most fun with this one. All things considered, if you're looking for games that really offer that Phineas and Ferb experience, I don't think you can go wrong with either version of this game. But here is where the fun stops. We had the DS games, which were kinda bad, but charmingly nostalgic. We had Across the Second Dimension, which was legit pretty good. But now we have Phineas and Ferb, Quest for Cool Stuff. I didn't have the box for this one. We've jumped ahead a bit to the year 2013, and we're on the Xbox 360 now. So, timeline-wise, we're getting pretty close to the end of Phineas and Ferb's original TV run. And I guess at this point, they just gave up on the games. Okay, look, I'm not trying to be mean, but I played this whole game, start to finish, and I just have no idea why it exists. It was a complete and utter slog to get through. Okay, so the setup this time around is that Phineas and Ferb want to build a museum full of cool stuff. Go! This is the first game we've looked at that is purely a 2D side-scroller kind of game, and instead of playing as just Phineas and Ferb, you play as Phineas and Ferb inside this weird-looking mech with a giant drill attached to it. Sounds cool, is lame. Every level feels exactly the same, it's slow, there's never any challenge. You can play as Perry, but it's the exact same thing. There's these water levels that are horrible, and there's basically no story or sense of progression in the slightest. For real, I played for a couple hours and the game just stopped. Like, full on, their mom came home, everything they built disappeared, standard end of the episode bop stuff. I didn't even like the game, and even I was sitting there like, wait, that's it? So yeah, the gameplay's not great. In terms of giving the Phineas and Ferb experience, it's not the worst. It basically reuses all the assets from across the second dimension and aims to be more of a basic single episode of the show kind of thing. The music is fine, but it's mostly just reused songs from the show, which is cheating, but I don't know, man. Everything in this game is so weird and lifeless that it kind of just feels like a hazy fever dream. Basically, any strengths this game has in its presentation, it loses with its gameplay. There's a 3DS version, but I tried it. It's the same game. There's nothing different. You're way better off with Across the Second Dimension. But with that, we've only got one more game to look at today. A game that I completely forgot existed until I started writing this video, Phineas and Ferb Day of Doofenshmirtz, released in 2015 exclusively for the PlayStation Vita. Let me say that again. This game is a PlayStation Vita exclusive. No wonder I forgot about it. For those of you who don't know, the PS Vita was PlayStation's follow-up to the PSP back in 2012. It didn't get a lot of support, it never really caught on, but I love this thing. It's basically a portable PS3, but when I found out there was a Phineas and Ferb game on this thing, I realized there was gonna be a problem. You can't record gameplay footage straight from a Vita, which makes it kinda hard to talk about Vita games in a video. Nah, for that, you have to have the PlayStation TV. Yeah, we're getting real obscure now. This thing is basically a Vita, but without the screen. Or speakers. Or buttons, or basically anything that makes it a handheld console. It's just a Vita you hook into your TV, which makes it the only legitimate way to record good gameplay footage of Vita games. Unfortunately, these things flopped hard when they were released, which means they are not cheap to get today. So I forked over $500 for this fossil just to play Day of Doofenshmirtz, and this game's not compatible with PlayStation TV. Fine, you know what? Screw it, we're just gonna recreate it. Here. Phineas and Ferb Day of Doofenshmirtz is a worse version of Across the Second Dimension. You're still Phineas and Ferb, you're still shooting robots, and you're still using basically the same guns as before. There are some control differences, but yeah, this is kinda just a rehash of Across the Second Dimension, even reusing the character models again. So yeah, the game looks and plays fine, but that's kinda it. Of all the games we've looked at, this one feels the most cheap to me. The cutscenes are just comic panels, there's no voice acting this time, Phineas makes this really generic boing sound effect when he jumps and it annoys me. All things considered, it's really bland, it's kinda cheap, and I just don't think it's worth delving much deeper into. I mean really, even if this game was great, the best, most faithful Phineas and Ferb game ever, who in their right mind is gonna go out of their way to drop hundreds of dollars on discontinued game systems just to play a Phineas and Ferb game? Oh, wait. I don't believe it. I really don't believe it. Phineas and Ferb returning with 40 episodes across 2 new seasons. After officially ending 8 whole years ago, Phineas and Ferb are back. Do you know what this means? Denial worked! Pretending Phineas and Ferb wasn't over actually brought Phineas and Ferb back. We did it! Woo! So yeah, you may have heard the news that beloved Disney Channel animated classic Phineas and Ferb is coming back for not just 1, but 2 brand new seasons, which is insane. A couple of years ago, I made a whole video called Pretending Phineas and Ferb Isn't Over, where I took a look at a bunch of random Phineas and Ferb adjacent stuff to fill the void. And then last year I did a similar thing, except I looked exclusively at a bunch of Phineas and Ferb video games. Doing a Phineas and Ferb denial video every June, or July, has basically become a tradition here. Ringing in the summer with the most summery of all shows, except the winter episodes, and then boom, the show's just back now. Okay. Cool. As exciting as this is, it's actually not that surprising to me. Because despite my whole pretending it's not over bit, Phineas and Ferb never fully went away. There were specials released almost immediately after the show's finale. The creators of Phineas and Ferb made new shows that crossed over with Phineas, and of course, we got a whole new Phineas and Ferb movie on Disney Plus just like a couple of years ago. Mix that with the nearly endless amount of memes and references on TikTok and whatever, and I was just kind of expecting this. Like, I wouldn't really blame any of the more casual fans hearing about this revival and and thinking, wait, Phineas and Ferb ended? Oh, which reminds me, I guess for the three of you here who don't know, Phineas and Ferb was a Disney Channel cartoon about two stepbrothers doing insane stuff every day of their summer vacation, while their pet platypus Perry sneaks off to fight an evil scientist named Doofenshmirtz, and for some reason, everybody sings. The show was created by two guys named Dan Povenmire and Jeff Swampy Marsh and premiered on Disney Channel back in 2007, where it became a massive instant hit. Genuinely, this is probably the most nostalgic and timeless show of the late 2000s. So this is all very exciting. A classic cartoon from our childhoods is coming back with a ton of new episodes. But that's like basically all we know. I'm working on this video a few months in advance, so this news is still pretty fresh, and it's entirely possible more will come out by the time you're seeing this, but at the moment, all we really know is 2 seasons of Phineas and Ferb are being made by Dan Povenmire. For a while, whether or not Swampy was going to be involved was actually kind of an unknown as well, but it looks like he is in fact involved, which is a relief. I have a lot of faith in Dan Povenmire, but the idea of an iconic show being revived with only half of its original creators definitely would have made me raise an eyebrow. I mean, think about it. If you had to get like surgery that required 2 doctors and someone came in day of and said, hey, just so you know, only one of the surgeons came in today, is that good? Is that cool? Would you feel confident that everything was gonna go as smoothly as it did when you had surgery in 2007? This comparison kind of got away from me. Anyway, all I'm trying to say here is that Dan and Swampy are making this revival, so it's all good. The surgery we loved as kids is back. But I'm not equipped for this. I'm the pretending it's not over guy. I'm the denial guy.
Merch link below.
I don't know what to do when my delusions are actually validated. What am I meant to do when the false reality I've built for myself becomes actual reality? I have problems. But I mean, hey, the show's not back just yet. Technically, the show's still over, which means this is my last chance to pretend Phineas and Ferb isn't over. It's time to live in denial! Kinda. So, for all of us Phineas and Ferb fans who can't wait for the revival's premiere, what do we have to fill the void in the meantime besides just re-binging the show on Disney Plus again? Well, why watch Phineas and Ferb when you can read Phineas and Ferb? That was a horrifically sad sentence. Phineas and Ferb, Candace Against the Universe, the movie, the novel. Yeah, you ever notice this? Ever since I was a kid, I've seen these weird novelizations of popular kids movies that just make no sense to me. The only reason you'd really want one of these books as a kid is if you've already seen the movie it's based on. So you buy the book and oops, you already know the entire story, so you just never read it. Money wasted. I don't know, it was probably your parents' money, so I guess it didn't matter. Well, I guess Phineas and Ferb couldn't escape that phenomenon because in 2020, the Disney Plus exclusive movie Candace Against the Universe got a novelization. Do kids even buy books anymore? They read? What's the point of this? As you might expect, this is just the story of the movie in book form. It's 142 pages long, the text is gigantic, and it even has these little black and white screenshots from the movie on basically every page, so you can pretend you're watching the cartoon. Okay, I'm giving this thing a hard time, but yeah, it's kinda cute. It's a bit of a novelty, and I guess if you don't have Disney Plus, this is an option to experience Phineas and Ferb's big comeback. It was only $7. I mean, that is $3 less than a month of Disney Plus. Yeah, maybe giving up full color, voice acting, original songs, and like, animation is worth the $3 savings to you. I don't know you. Maybe you'd prefer this, Phineas and Ferb's Guide to Life, a Phineas and Ferb themed activity book from 2011 that randomly got a second edition printing in 2020. Apparently Disney was just really banking on Phineas and Ferb books to be like the hot new trend of 2020. Warning, this guide can lead to severe creativity, loss of laziness, and impaired sense of the laws of gravity. Thank God they warned me. So like I said before, Guide to Life is an activity book for basically the littlest, tiniest babies, written from the perspective of Phineas, Ferb, and their friends as they try to teach you how to live a life as exciting as theirs. And they don't waste time either. Page 1, what are you doing with your life? Starting those existential crises early, I guess. Did you invent a time machine today? Alright, Phineas, lay off the pressure. It's starting to feel like one of those bogus motivational books that are supposed to just make you feel like a loser so you'll keep giving the author money. What kind of racket are these kids running here? So for the most part, this book is just kinda, I don't know, inconsequential. A lot of it's boiling down random episodes of Phineas and Ferb into goofy little advice segments, and the rest is a bunch of activities where you're supposed to like fill in the blanks, answer questions, or draw or write something down. Which sounds kind of fun until you realize that means that half this book is blank. Seriously, every 2 or 3 pages you get one that's just completely blank. I paid $10 for this. I don't know, man. If you're just jonesing to do some Phineas and Ferb worksheets, I mean, go crazy. But for me, that's what I get for reading. No one reads anymore. Nah, let's get serious now and talk about some toys. Yeah, so in the first Phineas and Ferb Isn't Over video, I talked about a few Phineas and Ferb toys, but I didn't actually have any to show. They're all over a decade old and can get kind of expensive nowadays, so I just kinda looked at pictures of them on the internet. But not today! That's right, I decided to actually be a competent YouTuber for once and prepare for a video. Huh, who'd have thought? And trust me, I have a wealth of Phineas and Ferb toys to look at this time around. As usual, I'll eventually go over these in much greater detail on my second channel, Fofi, but for now, let's take a look at a few highlights. Okay, maybe highlights is a strong word. So picture this, it's 2010, I'm 14, you may or may not have been born yet. Oh my god, I'm old. You're a Phineas and Ferb fan, you walk into a toy store, and you see these. Ew. Yeah, so I've made no secret of the fact that all of these Phineas and Ferb toys kinda give me the creeps. Phineas is just not meant to be 3D, man. And finally seeing these toys in real life does not really help. They're even more 3D now. That's like the whole problem. Ferb my ride. Okay, two things about this pun. First, there's no Ferb. Second, just no. Bad. Try again. And okay, being real here, I know I'm giving these toys a hard time, but they deserve it. Yeah, I don't really like these. I mean, conceptually, they're great. Each of these action figure sets come with 2 characters and something for them to do today. The fact that each toy kind of comes with a scene or activity is perfectly Phineas and Ferb. Not to mention a lot of it's just ripped straight from the show. Like this Perry and Doofenshmirtz set comes with the backfiring Uglyonator, which comes from an episode that I watched literally yesterday. Plus, you got Phineas and Ferb building a race car, Phineas and Candace in a band, Phineas and Ferb in a band. Okay, I never said there was variety. And the basic characters themselves are fine. I've ragged on the problematic transition to 3D a lot, but these toys get reused between a lot of the various playsets, so I kinda got used to it. But the Doofenshmirtz and Perry toys are actually right on the money. Legit, I have no complaints about these. Compared to everyone else, these 2 characters translated to 3D basically perfect. But it's once you start actually trying to, you know, play with these toys that everything just kind of falls apart. Like, literally. Phineas and Ferb characters aren't what you might call structurally sound. Their arms and legs are so tiny they couldn't hold up air, let alone like anything else. And naturally, that does not translate great into toys. I swear to God, I couldn't get these toys to fit onto their stands to save my life. And all because their spindly rubber legs just wouldn't stop bending. These are not meant to be bendable, posable toys, by the way. The one of Phineas and Candace was the absolute worst. Not only would neither of them fit or stand properly, but the toy itself was literally meant to rock back and forth rapidly, so yeah, they just fell off. I spent money on this. This is not good. Some of them are kind of fun though. The Phineas and Ferb band set was actually kind of cute. When you press down on Ferb's head, he actually kind of plays the drums and they move. And moving the whammy bar on Phineas's guitar makes him strum the strings. Kinda. It's at least a little cool. Then there was the Ferb My Ride set, which, yeah, I kind of messed up on. I committed the cardinal sin of buying random stuff on eBay, not reading the description well enough. What I thought was a sealed complete playset here was actually listed as a not complete set. Yeah, I feel really stupid about that. Dumb. So yes, the toy had been opened, parts of it had been lost, and what was left was put back in the box and sold as is. Okay, that's fine, I guess. It's a bit disappointing, but I should have just paid more attention. What I'm certain the eBay listing didn't mention was that these toys were covered in dirt. Bleh. Ew. No, bad, ew. Seriously, this box must have been sitting in like a garage or attic for years. I didn't even feel comfortable touching it with my bare hands. I put on gloves. This is genuinely disgusting. Oh my god. Yeah, no, I can't do this. I don't care if this thing is rare, I'm throwing it away. Unbelievable. Selling me a toy they pulled out of a landfill. Friggin' found this thing in the back of a long-lost cave. Ugh. I'm in a bad mood now. Let's just move on. Boom, more Phineas toys. What a surprise. But actually, these two aren't just toys. How many of you guys remember Disney Infinity? This is one of those toys to life kids adventure games from like 10 years ago. Basically, it was Disney's answer to Skylanders. You put a toy on a thing and that unlocks the character and some related content in a larger video game. And Disney Infinity specifically is more of a video game toy box situation. Yeah, I never really paid attention to it back in the day. I already didn't like Skylanders type games, so, you know, why would I care? But I do remember taking a look at the full aisle of Disney Infinity toys that used to be at my local Toys R Us. You know, in the good old days. And even though I had no interest in the game itself, I did like some of these toys. Especially like, Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, and the Nightmare Before Christmas stuff. That was really cool. They all had a cute, unique art style, and they caught my eye every once in a while, but I never actually picked any up. Until now! Because if you couldn't guess from the fact that this is a Phineas and Ferb video, and I already showed them on screen already, Phineas and Ferb is in fact part of Disney Infinity. I guess Phineas and Perry, and Ferb didn't get the invite. As far as I can tell, these Phineas and Perry Disney Infinity figures mainly just unlock the characters for use in the big toy box mode of the game, and they have their own abilities and all that. I don't know, I don't really think it's worth deep diving into Disney Infinity to find more Phineas stuff. At least not right now. We're mainly focusing on the toys today, so let's actually look at those. And actually, I think these Disney Infinity figures are really nice. The Perry figure is genuinely great. The actual design isn't all that different from the action figure that we looked at earlier, but he's definitely got a cooler action pose. And Phineas, my god, I think they did it. I think they finally made a 3D Phineas toy that isn't horrifying. I mean, look at him. They gave his weird head and his stupid little body a bit more of like a stylized look. And they gave him like actual eyes instead of creepy little dots on giant white circles. I mean, it's not perfect. Phineas still isn't really meant for 3D. And if you turn him the wrong way, you might, So yeah, better, but not perfect. Overall, the world of Phineas and Ferb toys are, I'm gonna say bad, despite their best efforts. So when toys fail, you've already exhausted all video game options in a different video, and books are books. There's nothing else to do but to turn back to TV to find something to fill that Phineas and Ferb void. Of course, it could just watch Phineas and Ferb, but that's too easy. We want something a bit less obvious here, I guess. And that's actually not hard to find, because even though Phineas and Ferb ended in 2015 and is getting ready to come back soon, that doesn't mean the creators of the show have just been sitting around twiddling their thumbs over the last 8 years. On top of the occasional extra Phineas content here and there, the creators of Phineas and Ferb, Dan Povenmire and Jeff Swampy Marsh, have worked on some completely different shows that just happen to be in the same universe as Phineas and Ferb. I've talked about them briefly before, but since we're going all out here, screw it, let's do it again. First up, in 2016, our dynamic duo put out Milo Murphy's Law, an entire animated series based around, well, Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. The main character, Milo Murphy, is a descendant of the creator of Murphy's Law, who I assume was named Murphy, so bad fortune follows him around literally everywhere he goes. And they're not playing around. The universe wants this kid dead. In the first 5 minutes of the first episode, Milo and his friend Zach get chased by a giant concrete drainage pipe that came loose when a bungee cord broke. Milo then uses that bungee cord to lasso away, but then it snapped in half, leaving him and Zach running on top of the drainage pipe as it led them off a cliff, face planting into a ton of mud before the pipe fell on top of them. Not killing them, but definitely making them miss their bus to school. Milo couldn't use his phone GPS to find a way to the next bus stop because of all the mud, so he pulled out a paper map, which then got scooped up by a hawk. Cool. As they then tried to take a shortcut through the rock quarry, which was being filled up by a random oil spill, that hawk that stole the map then swooped overhead, catching the map on an errant spark from a telephone pole. The map caught on fire, the hawk dropped it, and it set the entire oil spill ablaze. In the first 5 minutes, not including the theme song time. But Milo remained positive and prepared the entire time, and of course, it all worked out in the end. That's Milo Murphy's Law. And as you can probably tell just looking at it, the show's got a lot in common with Phineas and Ferb. The art style isn't necessarily identical, but it's real similar. You can immediately tell the show's from the Phineas and Ferb guys. Plus, the sense of humor is identical. They still do songs all the time, which is cool because Milo's voiced by Weird Al of all people, and it even shares some of the characters. Yeah, Doofenshmirtz becomes a recurring character in Milo Murphy's Law by season 2. And of course, where Doof is, other Phineas and Ferb characters are sure to follow. The show's really fun. Not quite as special as Phineas and Ferb, but a pretty solid option if you're looking for something new to fill the void. Speaking of new though, Dan Povenmire recently created an even newer show that premiered just last year, Hamster and Gretel. Despite the hamster getting top billing, the show is mainly about Gretel, a little kid who is randomly given superpowers by, like, aliens or something, I don't know. Her older brother Kevin was meant to get superpowers too, but instead they went to their pet hamster. A+ naming. Hamster and Gretel then become local superheroes while Kevin helps guide them as the brains of the operation. And from there, the show's basically what you expect. Fighting villains, balancing normal life with hero life, maintaining secret identities, even though Gretel still goes by Gretel when she's a superhero, etc, etc. You know, superhero stuff. But of course, it's still got everything you'd expect from a show in this, like, Phineas and Ferb lineage. The art style and senses of humor are again super similar. Jeff Swampy Marsh might not have been involved in the creation of this show, but he's definitely still providing voices like always. And of course, there's still plenty of songs, just like in Phineas and Ferb and Milo Murphy's Law. Actually, now that I think about it, the first 5 minutes of this show's premiere also involves a giant concrete drainage pipe. Huh. Weird. All of these shows are totally solid, and Phineas and Ferb fans will 100% find stuff to like in both Milo Murphy's Law and Hamster and Gretel. There's 2 seasons of Milo Murphy's Law, and that's about it, unfortunately. But Hamster and Gretel is still brand new. I think the first season wrapped up super recently, like earlier this month. And a second season has already been confirmed. And don't forget, all of that is still on top of the fact that Phineas and Ferb are coming back. You could almost argue this video was entirely pointless. That's it. That's the end of the video. Phineas and Ferb are coming back. Eventually. Yeah, we've known about this big revival of the Disney Channel classic Phineas and Ferb for a while now. What we don't know is when it's actually happening. I mean, my first video talking about the revival dropped a whole year ago. To be honest, I thought we'd have more to talk about by now. But it is a tradition here to ring in every summer by talking about the triangle and the Tetris block. And while I know we're all excited to be getting more Phineas and Ferb, the anticipation's given me some time to think on things and ask the maybe controversial question, should Phineas and Ferb come back, right? Like, is it a good thing that the show we all watched growing up is getting not 1, but 2 new seasons sometime in the near future? That's a ton of new episodes for a show that already ran for around 129 episodes originally, plus 2 movies and a handful of specials. And so many other classic shows have fallen off hard because they just kept going. I know I'm usually the living in denial, don't let it end kind of guy, but does Phineas and Ferb actually need to come back? Will this revival lead to a ton more classic stories and gags, or will this ultimately be a huge mistake for the show's legacy? Or will it be some nebulous third thing where it leaves everyone feeling, indifferent? Well, I guess the best way to find out is to just dissect the original series. So what is Phineas and Ferb? I know. For most of you watching, that is an insanely simple question. And it's something I've already talked about a million times, but just to set the foundation for this video, let's go over it in full. Phineas and Ferb is a Disney Channel animated series from 2007 that follows 2 stepbrothers, Phineas and Ferb, as they spend each day of their summer vacation doing increasingly crazier things. Like building a roller coaster, making a portal to Mars, creating an army of robot clones of themselves, starting a band. Okay, maybe they aren't always crazier than the last, but you get it. Meanwhile, their older sister Candace is always trying to get the boys in trouble by tattling on them to their mom. Why? I don't know. She doesn't seem concerned for them. She doesn't seem worried that anyone's gonna get hurt or that something's gonna get damaged. She just seems to revel in the idea of getting her brothers in trouble. Older sibling stuff, what can I tell you? Meanwhile, while all of this is going on, Phineas and Ferb's pet platypus Perry sneaks off to live his double life as a secret agent. Every episode has him go off to fight the evil scientist Dr. Doofenshmirtz. He's a lovable, bumbling idiot whose evil schemes are always really petty and stupid. They pretty much always go wrong, usually in a way that manages to overlap with whatever the boys are doing back at home, causing the evidence to vanish before Candace can show their mom. Like when Doof made a machine that forced people to dance, accidentally shot it at Phineas and Ferb's latest creation, causing it to get up and dance away before mom got home. Perry defeats Doofenshmirtz for the day, sneaks back home with no one noticing, Phineas and Ferb celebrate a job well done, and Candace bashes her head against the wall. That's the formula for pretty much every single episode of Phineas and Ferb. And considering how many episodes there are, it's absolutely astonishing how much this works. I mean, you would think that 4 seasons of the exact same formula over and over would get insanely boring after a while. But the cool thing is that this formula, at its core, has endless possibilities. The only limit is your imagination. Or, I guess, the imagination of the show writers. If the premise is Phineas and Ferb do something impossible, that's it, then they can literally do whatever they want. It's not just big machines. They can start an animation studio, make it snow in the summer, create a video game, or reform a disbanded 80s hair metal band, anything. But the show always makes sure to sprinkle in plenty of episodes that break away from this formula. Episodes where Candace helps Phineas and Ferb instead of trying to get them in trouble. Episodes where Perry and Doofenshmirtz team up. Episodes that explore a wide variety of what-if scenarios that don't fit the usual patterns at all. One of the earliest and best examples of this is my favorite episode, Dude, We're Getting the Band Back Together. This was maybe like halfway through season 1, and it's a double-length special where Phineas and Ferb work to get their parents' favorite band, Love Handle, to reunite for their wedding anniversary. And for once, Candace is actually totally down to help. And it's cute seeing everyone getting along. Plus, in the B-plot, Perry helps Doofenshmirtz prepare for his daughter Vanessa's 16th birthday. This is one of the earliest examples examples of Perry and Doof being depicted more as friends than rivals, and it's always been one of the more fun parts of their dynamic. Episodes like these just have such a feel-good vibe, and change up the pace enough to keep the formula fresh, allowing this show to be incredibly formulaic, but never repetitive. But a comedy show like Phineas and Ferb thrives entirely on two things: its writing and its characters. Now, we've talked a bit about the writing already, but I actually don't think this show gets enough credit for how genius the characters and character dynamics are. You got Phineas and Ferb, who are two relentlessly optimistic and positive characters. They can do literally anything they want and are absolutely untouchable. They make these insane creations every day and suffer no consequences. Everything goes right for them. On the flip side, you've got Doofenshmirtz. Dude is also a genius who manages to create a new impossible machine every single day. But where Phineas and Ferb create their stuff for fun, Doof always makes his stuff for like petty grievances. And instead of being untouchable and suffering no consequences, his creations always blow up in his face. Then you've got Candace, whose only goal in the entire series is to get her brothers in trouble and stop them from having fun. Instead of a new mission every day, she's always got that one thing on her mind. But where everything always goes right for her brothers, things always go as wrong as possible for Candace. It honestly can get a little hard to watch life just absolutely destroy her at every opportunity. Then you got Perry the Platypus, whose only goal every episode is to stop whatever Doofenshmirtz has planned, and he succeeds every time. Perry is to Doofenshmirtz as Candace is to Phineas and Ferb, but from opposite perspectives. Not only do the protagonists act as perfect mirrors to the antagonist, but each half of the show acts as a perfect mirror to the other half. Phineas and Ferb are basically Doofenshmirtz if he didn't fail all the time, and Perry is basically Candace if she didn't fail all the time. In fact, the show even plays around with this idea sometimes. There's a whole episode where Perry and Candace swap places, and an episode where Phineas and Ferb's plans get swapped with Doofenshmirtz's. This might sound simple or obvious, but it honestly never hit me until I was rewatching the show for this video. And I'm just so blown away at how perfectly thought out this cast of characters is. How their energies contrast while still linking together perfectly. All to create that synergy, I guess, that allows the two halves of each episode to flow expertly. And to me, that's kind of the secret sauce that allows this show and its purposely formulaic setup to never feel stale. It's never forced. Everything works together so naturally. And plus, you've got all the supporting characters, like Phineas and Ferb's friends, Isabella, Baljeet, and Buford. They all add a lot to the group dynamics and have their own quirks. Isabella is hopelessly in love with Phineas, which the show is not subtle about. But she's also just as confident, optimistic, and prepared for anything as Phineas. They're a perfect pair. Baljeet is the child prodigy science genius character who can provide your nerd jokes, so he's often paired up with Buford, the bully who eventually just joins the group. They're a perfect, comedy duo. These characters, along with a lot of the other supporting cast, are admittedly pretty one-note, but for a show that moves as quickly as Phineas and Ferb, I think that works. And, side note, the pacing in the show can often be pretty quick, bordering on frantic at times. Between the 2 or 3 stories going on each episode between Phineas and Ferb, Candace, and Perry and Doofenshmirtz, there's a lot to squeeze into 11 minutes. And that's not even to mention the musical numbers. Of course, no in-depth discussion of Phineas and Ferb will ever be complete without talking about the music. And I am an intense music nerd, so obviously I gotta talk about it. And Phineas and Ferb might just have the best examples of cartoon musical numbers in all of TV animation history, because, oh my god, Phineas and Ferb managed to feature at least one brand new original song in almost every episode of the show. There was no song in the first episode, but after that, it's basically a rule that every episode has at least one new musical number, sometimes multiple. And where I was kinda harsh to the songs in Steven Universe in my last video, I have basically nothing but good things to say about the songs in Phineas and Ferb. And maybe it's just those Disney resources, maybe it's because the show came out during the peak High School Musical era, but these songs are killer in every way. Which, I mean, shouldn't be surprising since Dan Povenmire, co-creator of the show, is the dude who wrote the Campfire song for SpongeBob, one of that show's most iconic moments. I mean, even just starting with the theme song, it's a perfect encapsulation of everything. Not only do the lyrics perfectly set up the premise of the show, listing off a bunch of crazy things to do over the summer break, but the pacing of the song is so upbeat and quick, just like the show, really energized. It feels instantly classic and totally modern at the exact same time. Or modern for 2007 at least. And the reason behind that is actually pretty interesting. If you look up the original pitch reel for Phineas and Ferb, which I assume was released as some DVD bonus feature or something, you can actually hear the original rough demo of the theme song. And in terms of the lyrics and melody, it's the exact same song we know today, but it's this completely different, much more bouncy, classic cartoon theme song. It's got that Looney Tunes or Silly Symphonies energy. Think like Tiny Toons or Animaniacs. Honestly, considering how timeless the Phineas and Ferb series has turned out to be, a theme song that throws back to the early days of cartoons is kind of fitting. But the choice to then crank it up and turn it into this more modern pop punk, ska punk track performed by Bowling for Soup just put it on a whole other level. It adds the modern to the retro and creates something that's as timeless as the show itself. And that's just the theme song. The actual show has so many classics with insanely catchy melodies, great vocal performances, a huge variety of genres, and just really good production. And again, the fact that they managed a new song in almost every episode at this level of quality, insane. Now, to be fair, they weren't all hits. The songs are pretty much never bad, but when you gotta write this many tracks, some are just gonna be inherently more mid than the others. There are some songs that are basically just a 30-second thing that kind of loops one idea and ends as soon as it begins. Great for the scene, but you wouldn't really listen to it on its own. But on the other hand, that means that there are some songs in this huge discography that are genuine underrated gems. You ever hear the rock climbing wall song from the season 4 episode Just Desserts? It's one of those quick ones that's over in a flash and most people probably barely remember, but it's a sleeper hit. It's this kind of like nerdy 80s new wave jam in the style of like Talking Heads or Oingo Boingo, so of course it's right up my alley. But it's like 20 seconds long, and I don't even think it's included in the mountains of soundtrack CDs. It's insane that a cartoon could put out so many great songs that there are actual hidden gems that are overlooked. Like you're talking about the discography of a band that's been around for 10 years. And I wouldn't say the songs ever saw a notable dip in quality or anything, but in terms of looking forward towards the revival, you gotta wonder how many more classics they've got in them. I mean, even as early as season 2, the original show was reusing songs from time to time. But to be honest, this is Disney we're talking about, so I guess I'm not particularly worried. Writing good songs is kind of their thing. But talking about the music reminds me. I want to go back to that episode, Dude, We're Getting the Band Back Together. The one where Phineas and Ferb get the 80s band Love Handle to reunite for their parents. This is my favorite episode of the show. It has a great, wholesome premise and some fantastic songs, some of the best in the series. But when I was rewatching it in preparation for this video, something struck me that I haven't been able to get off my mind. And it all has to do with this one flashback to Phineas and Ferb's parents, Linda and Lawrence, attending the Love Handle farewell concert and falling in love. Something doesn't add up to me, so if you'll indulge me, this section is gonna be my own little film theory. So again, Love Handle are supposed to be an 80s hair metal band that broke up due to, quote, pressures from a dwindling fan base. Now, as an 80s music nerd, I instantly assume they mean in the 90s. Love Handle were on top of the world in the 80s, then lost their fan base and relevance by the early 90s, because that is when grunge came along and killed all the metal bands. And looking at how Linda and Lawrence are dressed in the flashback, being described as a stylish couple, I have to assume that what they're wearing is meant to be the defining style of the time. And based on the hair, the glasses, the sweater, all of this feels like it's either late 80s or very early 90s. Yeah, you know that period in the 90s where it was still kind of the 80s and for some reason everyone was wearing sweaters? Yeah, we've seen how this show depicts 80s fashion and it's never this reserved. So I'm getting like early 90s vibes here, which would make sense for a hair metal band farewell concert. Love Handle are playing a huge stadium for probably the last time in decades. Lawrence has this swoopy haircut that feels plucked right out of a 90s sitcom, but that's still kind of clinging on to the 80s mullet vibe in the back. Linda is wearing the kind of poofy, oversized bluish-green sweater that would have been popular in the late 80s to early 90s. The two kiss due to a stadium's worth of peer pressure, and I guess because they like each other, and this starts their romantic relationship. It's a nice story, but I got a couple problems with it. First, for setting, let's just assume this is in 1992. 1 year after grunge killed the hair metal bands, but early enough in the 90s that 80s fashion hadn't completely died out yet. And you know, based on the oversized shirts and short spiky hair on some of the extras, I feel like Friends is like right around the corner from hitting this timeline. So we've got our assumed setting, and what this does is create a couple of weird inconsistencies. First, it's canon that in the 80s, Phineas's mom Linda was a pop star. She was a one-hit wonder named Lindana. This is set up super early on in the One-Hit Wonder episode. And even in the present day, she gets recognized as Lindana. Her songs are being re-released on greatest hit compilations, and she's making big concert appearances appearances. We never get any confirmation of what year in the 80s she had her hit song, but considering her stage name is Lindana, like Madonna, who released her first album in 1983, and her song is I'm Lindana and I Wanna Have Fun, clearly riffing on Cyndi Lauper's Girls Just Wanna Have Fun, which also came out in 1983, I think it's safe to assume that Lindana broke in 83. Which, shockingly, is actually backed completely by the opening line of her one hit. The first line is, I'm not Roxanne, I'm not Eileen, I'm not Sharona. Name-checking 3 hit songs with girls' names as their title, all from the same 5-year period. Roxanne, the Police song from 1978, My Sharona, the Knack song from 1979, and the most recent one, Come On Eileen, a hit song from 1982. For all those to be relevant references in a hit pop song, all signs would point to Lindana breaking into the mainstream in or around 1983. So, in the early 90s, I find it very unlikely that Linda would be in the crowd at a Love Handle show, have a spotlight shine on her, and no one would notice this is a famous pop star. Especially since this probably wasn't even 10 years since her hit song. If she's still getting recognized and drawing crowds in the present day, then in the early 90s, there's no way she wasn't still at least recognizable. But the more important issue is the timeline. Again, assuming this is around maybe 1992, and this is the moment where Linda and Lawrence first got together, then why are Phineas and Ferb stepbrothers? We know these two got married on June 15th, but again, we're never told what year. If they got together here and already had kids from previous relationships, then by 2007, when the show takes place, Phineas and Ferb should be nearing their 20s, and Candace should probably be moved out as she's nearing her mid-20s. Even if you scooch the timeline up to say they got together in 1999, that would only just barely match the timeline we see playing out in 2007. But then, that late 80s, early 90s fashion, described as stylish for the time, wouldn't make sense around Y2K, so it has to be before that. This romantic, rosy story about their parents getting together at the Love Handle farewell show just can't be the whole picture. It's too simple, and it just doesn't add up. Something had to happen after this that caused them to split up, have kids with other people, get divorced, then reconnect, bringing their families together. And that is what the revival show should be about. Give us the rom-com! The show's music is fine. Next section. So, the interesting thing about Phineas and Ferb getting an official revival is that this isn't necessarily new. Okay, the full series revival is new, but Phineas and Ferb coming back in general isn't. To some extent, they never fully went away. They were kind of too big for Disney to completely let go of. In fact, in the midst of the show's last few episodes, there were actually a few specials made as pilots for potential spin-offs. You got Doof 101 and the Alka Files. Doof 101 was a one-off segment that took place after summer vacation, where Doofenshmirtz, having retired from evil, becomes his daughter Vanessa's high school science teacher. This goes about as well as you'd expect. He accidentally makes something evil happen, Perry the Platypus has to come and stop it, and that's basically the episode's main plot. The B-plot, however, for some reason, follows these 3 bugs who are trying to make contact with humans for, I don't know, scientific discovery. It really doesn't matter. The punchline of every single one of their scenes is just they get squashed or hurt in some way. That's really the only joke, and it's not that interesting. And then you have the Alka Files, an hour-long special that focuses entirely on Perry the Platypus and the secret agency he works with, featuring a reformed from evil Dr. Doofenshmirtz joining the team, plus a cast of other animal secret agents. It's got its own new theme song and everything. You can tell right away that this show has a very slightly updated art style. It's clearly still Phineas and Ferb, but the scale feels bigger. Backgrounds seem more detailed, and it's hard to explain, but it just feels like they reined in some of the more cartoony visuals to bring the show more in line with other action comedy series. Overall, this was a fun time getting an extra look into Perry's secret agent life, but I can kind of see why this didn't get picked up for a full series. It feels kind of one note, without the same potential for a long-running series that Phineas and Ferb had. I mean, the only characters who even speak in the special are Doofenshmirtz, Monogram, Carl, and the villain. Oh, and then you have the special's B-plot characters. Oh my god, it's the stupid bugs again! They really wanted to make this stick, didn't they? It's the same 3 bugs, now trying to be noticed by the humans so they can join Alka, but again, every single one of their scenes just ends with them being maimed in some way. That's it. It's a fun enough concept, but I just can't believe they thought this would be enough to carry the B-plot for an entire series. Oh my god. Overall, these 2 spin-off concepts just didn't pan out, and I can see why. The ideas are cute, but I just can't see enough here to keep me interested for more than a couple of episodes. They They take the endless possibilities inherent in the Phineas and Ferb concept and reel them back in with more narrow settings, smaller casts, and gimmicks that I could just see getting way more repetitive than the original show's formula. I guess they were just really determined to make a Doof and Perry spinoff, but turning a B-plot into an A-plot ain't easy. And I'm sorry, but the bugs just weren't gonna cut it. So the spinoffs didn't really take. But the creators of Phineas and Ferb still got the opportunity to make a whole new show, Milo Murphy's Law. Now I've talked about this show before, but I never really got into the weeds of my personal opinions about it. This show is all about a kid who is a descendant of the guy who coined Murphy's Law, which states that whatever can go wrong will go wrong. Of course, meaning that disaster follows this kid everywhere he goes. But he's always prepared and optimistic about it. In fact, despite everything going wrong, they always manage to work out in the end. Now I really like this premise. It has the same wide open, endless possibilities as Phineas and Ferb, even though the way those possibilities manifest is a little bit more repetitive. Either way, I really enjoyed season 1, got pretty invested in Milo Murphy and his friends and the cartoony antics, but the show sort of fell apart for me by season 2. See, in the show's efforts to set itself apart from Phineas and Ferb, Milo Murphy's Law actually has an ongoing plot. But for a good chunk of the show, the main characters aren't actually involved with said plot. Yeah, for a good while, the plot development comes exclusively in the B-plots, which follow these two almost unrelated time travelers who are just obsessed with pistachios for some reason. And since the plot primarily follows these two a lot of the time, it means we get a shocking number of episodes where Milo Murphy and his friends are either an afterthought or hardly involved at all, which, always just kind of made the show feel less interesting to me. But then we get the big change. At the start of season 2, Dr. Doofenshmirtz returns and becomes a recurring character in the show, which of course means that Perry, Monogram, and Carl come along too. And the plot starts revolving around that too, so even more stuff that distracts from the show's main characters and core premise. By the end of season 2, I was enjoying the show, seeing where the plot was leading and all, but I really missed when the show was about what it was supposed to be about. I just kind of lost my investment. To some extent, the show just felt caught in this purgatory of wanting to both set itself apart from Phineas and Ferb, while also purposefully keeping itself stuck in Phineas and Ferb's shadow. And ultimately, it made it a show that was never more than decent. And while you might think that would make me nervous about whether or not the creators could still make a good show with the Phineas revival, it's actually almost the opposite. I kept getting this vibe throughout Milo Murphy that the creators just wanted to be making Phineas and Ferb anyway. Heck, the show has a whole crossover episode with all the Phineas and Ferb characters, not just Perry and Doof. So if anything, I feel like sticking to their specialty may turn out to be a good thing for the revival. Because in terms of breaking new ground, their second show just didn't really stick the landing for me. Which, even though it's not making me nervous or anything, it is something I'm keeping in mind going into the new Phineas seasons. There's also Hamster and Gretel, the most recent series made by just one of the two people behind Phineas and Ferb. And while I've honestly not been super wowed by any of the episodes I've seen, I don't think it's crazy relevant to this conversation. The big Phineas and Ferb Disney Plus movie dropped like 2 years before the show even premiered, so talks of the Phineas revival were definitely already underway, which means comparing Hamster and Gretel to Phineas and Ferb, while interesting and understandable, I just don't think it's as relevant since this show was more or less meant to coexist with Phineas and Ferb, not be some spiritual successor. I will say though, despite being more modernized for the 2020s instead of the late 2000s, Hamster and Gretel is basically everything you'd expect from a show in the Phineas and Ferb lineage. It still looks the part, the songs are as great as ever, and even if I don't find it quite as interesting, it's clearly still very much on base. Obviously, the biggest thing to look towards in terms of what a modern Phineas and Ferb would be like is that Disney Plus movie, Candace Against the Universe. This movie dropped in 2020 and was kind of the official return of Phineas and Ferb. And I gotta say, if the revival is just more of this, I think we'll be in pretty good hands. This movie basically feels plucked right out of 2007. Even though it had been 5 years since the show originally ended, it was like no time had passed, which technically in the lore of the show, I don't think any time had passed. I think this whole movie is meant to take place in that original summer break. But hopping back to the original series here, with any reboot or revival of a show, a natural question is, how does this affect the original show's ending? So, how did Phineas and Ferb end? Well, the show kind of has two endings. There's the actual finale, and then there's the final point in the show's timeline, which premiered as a separate special a few episodes before the finale. The special was called Act Your Age, and it saw a 10-year time skip, showing Phineas and Ferb all grown up and getting ready for college. And the main focus of the episode is Phineas finally realizing that his lifelong friend / neighbor Isabella had a crush on him, and the two admitting their feelings for each other before going off to college. It's a really sweet episode that sets up the future of this cast really well. Phineas and Isabella are dating now and going to college together. Candace is at law school. Ferb is dating Doofenshmirtz's daughter Vanessa, who's like almost 10 years older than him. Interesting choice. But yeah, it's a cute story that probably would have made for a great finale or epilogue, but it's neither. It's just a random hour-long special in season 4. Now, the actual finale is called, of course, The Last Day of Summer, where, after a series of Groundhog Day hijinks where the last day of summer loops over and over and over again, Doofenshmirtz decides to give up on evil and become a good guy. Phineas, Ferb, Candace, and their friends stop the destruction of the time-space continuum, and it all ends with a big musical number because, of course, it does. But the interesting thing is that besides Doof turning good, there's no big story revelations happening here. It's just one final adventure to round out the summer. And the sentiment at the end is just, it's been a great summer, thanks for coming along. So while Act Your Age provides a more definitive ending for these characters' stories, the actual finale does leave things pretty open. I mean, all you gotta do is hop to the next summer and boom, the whole thing could just start again. Yeah, ironically. Speaking of which... Turns out, right as I started writing this video, we finally got some updates on the Phineas and Ferb revival thanks to the Annecy Animation Film Festival, which is something I've literally never heard about before in my life. But apparently it went down a few weeks back and they talked about Phineas and Ferb. And it made me think, oh yeah, I should probably talk about the actual revival at some point, shouldn't I? So what all do we know? Well, the Phineas and Ferb revival was first announced at the very start of 2023. Phineas and Ferb were returning for 2 brand new seasons, helmed by the original creators Dan Povenmire and Jeff Swampy Marsh, which was actually something I wasn't sure would happen at the start. Hamster and Gretel, the most recent show in this lineage, is just a Dan Povenmire project. No Swampy as co-creator. And as Dan started to blow up on TikTok a few years back, I saw a lot of people start miscrediting him as the sole creator of the show. And I was initially worried that Swampy would have been left behind or declined to be involved, but nah, the gang's all here. But up until recently, we didn't know much else. But with the updates from Annecy, we've got some more information. Apparently, it's been confirmed that the new series is being treated as a full continuation, picking up right where we left off as if nothing changed. The revival is taking place 1 year after the original, ringing in the next summer vacation, starting the whole shebang over again and getting right back to the Phineas and Ferb status quo. Yeah, I guess. Which, if the original show takes place in 2007, which is likely because of the technology you see, like flip phones and cable boxes, and because most kids shows take place in the current day that they're premiering to be relatable to their audience, that means the new Phineas should technically be happening in 2008. God, I wish they would commit to that. Just make the new revival just a whole period piece preserving that Disney Channel pop culture from 16 years ago. They would never do it, but I really wish they would. Unfortunately, yeah, they probably won't do that. Even just looking at the Disney Plus movie, which is supposed to take place in the original summer break, they already updated Ferb's phone to be just modern, so I really want this to just be a 2008 period piece, but they probably won't do it. God, it would be funny though. But yeah, anyway, taking place just a year after the original series means there's not going to be any complications with the Act Your Age stuff or anything like that. Phineas and Ferb can go right back to their usual adventures, creating crazy new stuff every day of their summer break, just a year older now. But it does kind of beg the question of Doofenshmirtz. He retired from evil at the end of the original series. He's a good guy. We see this in Doof 101, the Alka Files, the end of the original show, and in Milo Murphy's Law. And if they're sticking to that, then what exactly is the new Phineas and Ferb gonna do for its Perry Doofenshmirtz B-plots? It is canon that by the time this continuation starts, Doof would have been retired from evil for almost a year. And Act Your Age showed that Doof stayed good on his promise for a whole decade. Are they just gonna retcon that entire character arc for Doofenshmirtz for the sake of having more status quo episodes? Are they gonna try to explain it away somehow? Is this whole revival just a stealth relaunch of the Alka Files? Are the bugs coming back? It's kind of the one thing about the revival that's actually gonna be a little tricky to pull off. I mean, most likely they're just gonna retcon the character growth or find a super quick explanation. Also, they can put Perry and Doofenshmirtz back in their old rivalry, because that's what everyone wants to see. This is a nostalgia project. And chances are, most people probably don't even remember that Doofenshmirtz? Barry the platypus. Most people probably don't even remember that Doof gave up evil in the first place. I don't know, man. Beyond that, we don't really have much more to work off of. We know there's gonna be songs, and apparently there's gonna be some fan favorite stuff returning, but all that is stuff we really could have guessed because, well, it's Phineas and Ferb. The big elephant in the room here is the release date. There isn't one. We have absolutely no clue when any of this is coming out. We don't even have sneak peeks, which means things are either running a lot slower than you might expect, which would make sense, what with the writer and actor strikes from last year, potential animator strikes on the rise, and just the fact that, cartoons take a long time. The other option is that progress is moving along fine, but Disney is just being incredibly tight-lipped about it because they know how anticipated this revival is. But personally, I am getting kinda antsy to see something from the revival hit the public and inspire some more, like, tangible confidence that this is gonna be worth the wait. Because, unfortunately, after rewatching a lot of the show and really analyzing my thoughts on it, I wouldn't say Phineas and Ferb is a show that needs a revival. Like, it wasn't cut short, it wasn't left on a cliffhanger, and there really isn't any story that I feel is just begging to be told in this universe with these characters. The original run really did feel like it covered just about everything, and at some points, it did feel like the ideas were being stretched a little thin. Like, the execution was always great, the show was never bad at all, really, but the ideas themselves just weren't always totally on fire. I mean, the show revisited and reused parts from the roller coaster episode twice, which means there's basically 3 roller coaster episodes. And even as early as season 2, they were doing clip shows. These aren't really a thing anymore, but back in the days of like classic cable TV, popular shows could save on production or allocate resources to other places by dedicating an entire episode to just be a compilation of clips from older episodes, with some kind of threadbare framing device to just hold it all together. You get a whole new episode for a fraction of the work. And Phineas and Ferb had a few, which for a 4-season show feels a little egregious. If this is what they needed to do to make the original show as good as it was, then, you know, fine. But if the original series was already reusing ideas and content like this, I can't help but feel a little nervous about the revival. And honestly, the stuff that I think would make a Phineas and Ferb revival interesting are things that I'm pretty sure the creators would never do. Like, what if they did the Ed, Edd and Eddy thing and put Phineas and Ferb in school? And we saw them make crazy stuff in the summer. It'd be cool to see what they could accomplish trying to do the same insane things, but now, like, on their lunch break or without getting caught by the principal. Or like, what if they found a workaround that let Phineas and Ferb team up with Perry the Platypus more? Yeah, Perry can't let his cover be blown as a secret agent or else he'll be relocated to a different host family, but what if they found a way to work around that so the two could team up more? Having Perry there to help out with the inventions and stunts would be a cool new element. Or even having Phineas and Ferb help create gadgets to defeat Doofenshmirtz with Perry. And you know, they've tried this before, but really only in like one-offs and alternate reality specials. And I'm not saying that these are like good ideas. I completely understand why they would never do them for anything more than like a one-off. The summer break setting is imperative to the show's energy and atmosphere, and mixing Perry and the boys' adventures together could throw off the entire dynamic of the show. I get it, but it's weird and unexpected changes to the status quo like that to me would make a revival of a show like Phineas and Ferb feel more worthwhile. Look, based on the show's track record, the people making it, and the quality of recent Phineas and Ferb media, I do have full confidence that this revival will be, at least, pretty solid. But if it's just gonna be 2 more seasons, potentially more of just the same, I'm not sure if it needs to exist. Phineas and Ferb accomplished amazing things during its original run, and I'm sure it's gonna be such a nostalgic treat to get more of our favorite Disney Channel cartoon. I just don't want this show's legacy to be potentially downgraded from being a groundbreaking, once-in-a-generation series to just some familiar comfort food that, you know, is fun and nostalgic, but maybe goes on past its prime. I'm not saying that that will happen by any means, but it is kind of my main concern going in, and I am so excited to hopefully be proven absolutely wrong. Look at me, spend years in denial pretending Phineas and Ferb isn't over, and when I finally get my wish, boom, I'm complaining. Oh my god, someone shut me up.